So probably the best team in the NFL last year, outside of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to not win their division last year is the Indianapolis Colts. The 11-5 team lost the division to the Tennessee Titans and ended up losing in the wild card round to the Buffalo Bills. But all throughout their season, they provided incredible play, both offensively and defensively. Even though they had a lot of shortcomings at major key positions, mostly tight end, mostly defensive end, mostly just in little areas here and there, they were not really up to par. But with that being said, they still were one of the better teams in the NFL all year last year. So a couple things that were really good for this Indianapolis Colts team last year throughout the entire season. One of them is the turnover battle on the offensive side of the ball. They had 0 turnovers in all but 4 games and had less than 2 turnovers in all but 2 games. A lot of this has to do with the fact that their rushing attack and their running back play in general was incredible all season long. Jonathan Taylor looked like he is going to be one of the best running backs in the NFL for the next 4 or 5 years. What he's able to do from a pass catching standpoint, what he's able to do from a running back, pure running standpoint. And then he got so many running backs on this team. You forget they still have Naheem Hines, who is a very good running back in his own right. They still have Marlon Mack, who, if he doesn't get injured so much, he's probably one of the lead backs on this team. They still have Jordan Wilkins on this team as well, who is a very good player in his own right. So this running back core that they have on their team, even though it's maybe too deep, I don't think there's really a problem with having 4 guys who at any given point you can throw out there and say he's going to be a positive for your team. Now, defensively, the thing that really led this team to being one of the better defenses in the NFL was the fact that their run defense was incredible all year long. DeForest Buckner was even better than he was advertised when he came from San Francisco. We knew that he was going to be a good player, but I think a lot of people kind of looked at him. He was surrounded by first-round picks, both on the D-line, at the linebacker position, at the defensive back position. So he was surrounded by a lot of talent in San Francisco, so I think a lot of people didn't necessarily know if his production was going to transfer over to Indianapolis. But not only did it transfer, I think he got even better last year, which is something that for this Colts team going forward, especially given the fact that he's a really young guy, he's going to be a guy alongside other star defensive player Darius Leonard, who just had another typical incredible year. I mean, every single guy defensively who was put onto this team to play a certain role, you know, you have your star guys like DeForest Buckner, like Darius Leonard. You had your veteran presences like Justin Houston and Danico Autry at that defensive end position. You had some decent players at the corner position with Xavier Rhodes, Rocky Scene, Kenny Moore. You had a lot of decent players who played their role really well last year, and I think a lot of that also has to go, you know, a lot of this praise has to go to the defensive coordinator as well and just the coaching staff in general. Now here comes my favorite part of the video, and that's the part where I trash the Indianapolis Colts last year. I'm a Houston Texans fan, so any chance I get to talk bad about the Indianapolis Colts, especially when my team went 4-12 last year, I'm going to take the chance to do it. I'm really not sure who the guy was in the wide receiver room throughout last year. I understand that T.Y. Hilton is obviously the veteran presence. He's obviously probably the best receiver on the team. But you look at this team at the wide receiver core, T.Y. Hilton, I think, he's on the wrong side of 30 for sure. Michael Pittman Jr. didn't really, he played well. Michael Pittman Jr. played well. Zach Pascal has always been a decent player at wide receiver. But they did not address the position in the offseason at all. I don't think they signed a single wide receiver free agent. I don't think they drafted a single guy to play wide receiver. I don't necessarily know they still do have Paris Campbell. They did get J.J. Nelson. But you're kind of taking a risk by having those 2 guys as your 4th, 5th receivers, because if they bust out and don't provide good production, I don't know if you really can consider T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal, and Michael Pittman Jr. a trio of receivers to really lead your team into a Super Bowl run. Now, this gets even worse when you look at the fact that their tight end position played really poorly last year as well. I think their leading receiver at the tight end position had like 400 yards, and that was, what's his name? That was Mo Alley Cox. So, and especially when you look at the fact that they were playing with a quarterback in Phillip Rivers, who in his entire career has made a living out of using the tight end position. You look at the fact that, Antonio Gates was a Hall of Fame tight end playing with Phillip Rivers. Hunter Henry was a very decent tight end playing with Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers knows how to use his tight ends. And throughout last year, the tight end position really did not get used. It did not fulfill what it needed to do. And I think part of that, maybe part of that is Phillip Rivers. I didn't watch every single Colts game last year. But, just looking at what the numbers say that the tight end position was a very lackluster position for the team. And like the wide receiver position, they did not address the issue, whether it was through the draft or free agency. I don't really know how they would have addressed it, but they didn't address it. So I think going into next year, that's kind of going to be an issue for the team as well. Now, something that I brought up with the good things about the Indianapolis Colts was the fact that Justin Houston and Danico Autry were two solid veteran presences at that defensive end position. I believe both of them combined had 16 sacks, and they're both on the wrong side of 30. So, getting that from two guys like that, that's really good production. The problem is there was nobody else outside of those two who could help DeForest Buckner in the trenches. And not only that, both of those guys are probably not going to be on the team next year. Danico Autry already signed with the Tennessee Titans. I don't know what's going to happen with Justin Houston. He's a lot younger than I thought he was. He's only 30, which I thought he was like 35 or 36, but he's only 30. So he probably has a good, decent, 1 or 2 years left in him. But with that being said, the only way that they addressed the position was drafting Kwity Paye in the first round this year. Or with their first pick, they used it on Kwity Paye. And I like Kwity Paye. I think in 4 or 5 years, we'll be looking at him as a decent guy. He's going to get 8 to 12 sacks a year. But that's it's kind of a project pick. It's not really a pick that you're going to be looking at as a guy to help out DeForest Buckner and DeForest Buckner and Darius Leonard throughout these next few years. He's kind of going to be a project. And they already lost out on Danico Autry, who was their second best sack getter last year. They might not bring back Justin Houston, who is the third best sack getter on the team. And those two guys provided decent play in the run game as well. So I don't really get what was going on in the offseason this year for the team. They had some major holes to fill, and they just didn't. They really did not do it. Now here comes really my favorite part of the video, where I am going to absolutely trash the trade for Carson Wentz. So we replaced Phillip Rivers, who throughout his career was a turnover-prone quarterback. Last year was probably one of his better years in the past 5 or 6 in terms of keeping the ball in the offense's hands. And I kind of praise Frank Reich and the rest of the coaching staff for being able to do that with Phillip Rivers. Now, Phillip Rivers retired, and they needed to replace him. They had someone on the team already that could replace Phillip Rivers, and his name was Jacoby Brissett. He's already played in the system. He played well in the system. If you look at his stats when he played for the Indianapolis Colts, when he actually played, he played well. He had a mobility factor. He's not the most fast guy on the field. He's not the fastest guy on the team. But he can take a hit. He can run the ball a little bit. He can stand in the pocket. He can throw the ball very well. I don't understand why we trade for someone like Carson Wentz to be probably the worst quarterback in the division. If Houston keeps on to Deshaun Watson, there's no way Carson Wentz is better than Deshaun Watson. If Trevor Lawrence ends up being the guy that we think he is in Jacksonville, there's no way that Carson Wentz is better than Trevor Lawrence. If Ryan Tannehill continues to have great success as the quarterback of the Tennessee Titans, there is no way in hell that Carson Wentz plays better than Ryan Tannehill, especially given the fact that Carson Wentz does not have two incredible receivers like A.J. Brown and Julio Jones to be throwing to. The best threat that Carson Wentz has to be throwing to is probably Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield. That honestly is how bad their skill position group is right now in Indianapolis. And you're going to be asking somebody like Carson Wentz to just be carrying this team through a 17-game season. And he cannot do it. We saw what he couldn't carry this team. He couldn't carry the Eagles through 12 games last year without getting benched. We saw just how bad the Eagles were offensively with Carson Wentz as the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. From game one against the Washington football team last year, Carson Wentz was one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. And if I'm a Colts fan, I have to look at this and say, we traded a first-round pick for a guy who we're going to pay like $30 million and not address any of our other skill position groups. I have a really hard time with that if I am a Colts fan. I have a really hard time trying to justify that. I understand that the upside of this could be huge. I understand that Carson Wentz was an MVP candidate a few years ago. I understand that he led them to an incredible record a few years ago. But guess what? That was before he tore his ACL. That was before he had multiple injuries. And I just don't get the move. Especially when you had Jacoby Brissett on the team. You could have addressed the position through the draft. You could have addressed the position through free agency or trying to trade for somebody. We know how many quarterbacks are unhappy these days and how many quarterbacks are good backups on decent teams. I just don't think Carson Wentz was the move, and I honestly think it's going to be the thing that kills this team going forward. So in terms of a record standpoint, I honestly I could see this team going 6-11 in a 17-game season. I really can. Because if this Carson Wentz thing blows up, if their defensive line cannot produce like I don't think they're going to be able to, if their cornerback position doesn't hold up like they did last year, if their linebacking team, their linebackers are going to be great this year. I'm not even gonna think that that's an issue. If their offensive line starts to deteriorate, if their wide receiver room starts to get even worse than it was last year, if their tight ends are not used as well as they were last year again, 6-11 is honestly the best that this team could do. I hate the Indianapolis Colts, but that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm saying that they're going to go 6-11. It has everything to do with the fact that this team composition is not very good. Their running backs are good, their offensive line is good, and their linebackers are good. That's really about it. They have a star defensive tackle, but their defensive line is bad. They have a turnover-prone quarterback who I honestly think halfway through the year they're going to be talking about replacing with either Jacob Eason or who'd they draft this year, which was also Sam Ehlinger. They're either going to replace him with Jacob Eason or Sam Ehlinger halfway through this year, and they're going to be a very, 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 very bad team if that's the kind of road that we're looking at. On the upside, this team could go back to the playoffs. If Carson Wentz ends up playing well, which I don't think he will, but if he does, this team could go 12-5 or 13-4 even, just off the fact that their offensive line is great. Their linebackers are great. Their running back room is incredible. If Carson Wentz plays average, this team could be fighting for a playoff spot. He's honestly going to be like the Mitchell Trubisky to last year's Chicago Bears. That's how bad I think Carson Wentz. That's how bad I think he is. But with that being said, if he plays like that this year, he could lead this team to a playoff push. They're not going to win any playoff games. If they do, it'll be the wild card round. They're not going to the Super Bowl. They're not even going to go to the conference championship. I'd say a realistic prediction for this team is 10-7. And either fighting for that last wild card spot or not making it at all. With all that being said, that's going to be the video from me. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave a like. If you didn't, make sure you leave a dislike. Any feedback at this point is much appreciated. If you're new here, make sure you hit subscribe. If you want to leave a comment, go ahead. I'm not going to force you. I can't force you. That's illegal, and I don't know who you are. So do it if you want to. I'd appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.